When you first encounter Iudex Gundyr, he's just kneeling in the dirt, with the coiled sword lodging in his chest. The moment you pull it out, he rises. The first tutorial boss has risen, and he is here to judge you. The sword's description explains its purpose. The description of the weapon says, only bequeathed to chosen ash, as judged by the Iudex. That the Iudex awaits the arrival of ash as a scabbard. That explains the job he was given. His name literally means judge in Latin. That's exactly why he is standing there, to test whoever might come to light the fire. You see him again, this time a little different. Later, when you reach the untended graves, you find another version of him called Champion Gundyr. The description of this boss's soul reveals a small hunting story. Once a champion came late to the festivities and was greeted by a shrine without fire and a bell that would not toll. This reveals that he was the one meant to rekindle the flame, but he arrived after the fire had gone out. His chance to save the world slipped away, leaving him to wander the realm already dead. That essentially is Gundyr's story, from a chosen champion into a guardian of ashes, stuck in a role where he watches others succeed where he could not. When you fight his later form, he is no longer a judge waiting for someone to come. He is a warrior who can't accept what happened, still fighting long after his world has ended. The four-legged beast wearing armor who greets you at the end of the high wall of Lothric is far more than just a mindless beast blocking your way forward, because buried beneath that armor is a knight who once served the Pontiff Sulyvahn, a loyal outrider sent to distant lands. His fate was sealed by the very gift meant to empower him. The location of his fight cements his role in the world's design. Vordt waits at the lowest edge of the high wall, a sentinel standing before the gateway to the undead settlement. In the fight, Vordt challenges you with intensity and beast-like movements. Vordt drops his soul, which can be reshaped into two relics. The Vordt's Great Hammer, a weapon imbued with frost, whose every swing inflicts frostbite. The Pontiff's left eye, a ring that the Pontiff bestowed upon his knights, is said to contain a black orb that drives its bearer into endless battle until they lose themselves completely. The Outrider Knight's armor confirms what his gift truly meant, describing how the Pontiff gave his chosen soldiers the eyes of the Pontiff, transforming them into savage, raving warriors who could no longer think. Their humanity, essentially, stripped away until they existed only to serve as tireless guards, explaining that these eye-shaped orbs lure their wearer into combat, feeding their hunger for blood until they become beasts. The Pontiff granted them to only those sent to foreign lands. His frostbite is a reflection of what he has become, a creature so cold and numb that even his soul burns with ice, a living example of the Pontiff's cruelty. By the time his body collapses, the snow has already begun to settle on the stone floor. Moving on to the undead settlement, a place where decay has set its roots deep within the settlement, past the burning stakes and the hollow peasants who worship flame, lies a courtyard shrouded in fog, where an ancient swollen tree waits in silence. This is the curse-rotted Greatwood, a being that was never meant to be worshipped or feared as a god, but rather pitied. This is an item description that can be found. Curses seeped into the undead settlement, and the worst of them were sealed inside a spirit tree until the curses took their toll. By this description, the curse-rotted Greatwood is a container that could have failed, a vessel whose body swelled with the very rot it was meant to bury. You reach it through the winding wooden paths of the settlement, slipping past crumbling houses. You can hear the faint cries of the hollowed until the fog closes behind. Inside is a muddy courtyard where peasants once gathered to pray, where those same peasants now hang lifelessly from branches, their bodies fused into the trunk they once worshipped. The Greatwood is at the center, an immense, twisted figure with arms like roots, with a belly that pulses beneath layers of bark. It feels like the physical manifestation of the settlement's decay. Once it collapses, tearing open the ground beneath it, you gain access to the Pit of Hollows, a hidden chamber that connects to the Mound Maker's Covenant altar, one of the most elusive covenants in the game. The Greatwood also drops the Transposing Kiln, a key item that allows Ludleth of Kurland to transform boss souls into new weapons. But what makes this encounter unforgettable is the way the fight unfolds, not the lore of the story. The Greatwood cannot be harmed like other bosses. Its bark shrugs off blows. Its immense body means nothing to traditional attacks. Instead, the fight makes you look closer to strike the soft growths swelling from its limbs and belly, strange sacs that burst with fluid, releasing clouds of rot when broken. When the ground breaks down mid-battle, you both plunge into the pit below. The final phase becomes a desperate fight around those vulnerable points. The creature thrashing in its own filth and curses as they spill from every wound. Attacking those sacs is how you slay the curse-rotted Greatwood. Moving deeper through the road of sacrifices into the Crucifixion Woods, the area is filled with magic. The path goes into a boss arena filled with the sound of spellfire even before you see its source. Waiting there is the Crystal Sage, a robed figure who casts spells. He uses crystal sorcery just like the Great Mage, Big Hat Logan, and Seath the Scaleless from Dark Souls 1. This boss belongs to the Order of the Crystal Sorcerers whose techniques are scattered throughout Lothric. Even after this encounter, their kind reappears as recurring threats, suggesting that this so-called boss is one of many practitioners of crystal sorcery. The fight takes place on the edge of the woods, surrounded by broken statues with mists that catch the glow of magic. It's a fitting stage for an enemy like Crystal Sage. Unlike most bosses that use their arenas through weight and motion, the Crystal Sage uses distance. Every time you close the gap to raise your weapon, it flickers away, vanishing in a flash to reappear somewhere else in the arena. This teleportation is the main gimmick of this boss. Defeating it is necessary, not just for survival, but for progress, because this encounter opens up the entry to the Cathedral of the Deep, which has the Deacons of the Deep and the small doll needed to reach Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, making the Crystal Sages a crucial boss for the game's progression. Yet the most distinctive part of this encounter is his doppelgangers. The Crystal Sage casts magic spells. It also multiplies itself with magic. In the second phase, the arena fills with doppelgangers, spectral copies that unleash sorcery from every direction. Each of the Crystal Sages looks identical, firing deadly projectiles, but only one is real. You may be thinking, how do you recognize the real one? The true Sage always casts in a deep purple hue, while its clones shimmer in blue. But that's how you tell the difference between the real and the doppelgangers. If you are enjoying all these cool facts about the bosses in Dark Souls 3, be sure to like and subscribe because it goes a long way. After the fight with the Crystal Sages, we move into the heart of the Cathedral of the Deep, where the world mixes rot with incense. This is where candles burn in rows. Waiting at the end of that dark path are the Deacons of the Deep, a group consumed by their own worship. The cathedral is one of the great junctions of Lothric's middle reaches. It is here that the faithful gather to drown themselves in the corruption of worship rather than salvation, their bodies moving as one, their voices rising in a hymn that sound like a cursed prayer. When you walk through the fog gate, the battle begins with a crowd, a slow, creeping tide of red robes and smoke. In the middle of it, one of them glows faintly with a red light that pulses. This fight revolves around that red aura because the boss's health is tied to the red glow. So when you kill a Deacon with the crimson glow, the boss's health bar sinks. Then the crimson glow leaps to another, hidden somewhere within the group, forcing you to carve your way through bodies once again. As we talked before, the boss drops the small doll, but along with the doll, he also drops the soul of the Deacons of the Deep, which can be transformed into either the cleric's candlestick, a relic that glows with the faint light of their lost faith, or the deep soul, a sorcery. The candlestick's description speaks of their transformation under Archdeacon MacDonald, who guided them into the deep, teaching them to be both priests and sorcerers, blurring the line between miracle and heresy until both became the same. Into Farron Keep, where the land is broken, filled with rot, at the end of the swampy marsh, after lighting all the flames, you walk into the fog wall, coming face to face with the Abyss Watchers. Just like the Deacons of the Deep, this fight is a confrontation with the whole Legion. The first thing you notice when you walk into the arena is it is littered with motionless bodies, all wearing the same armor. The two Abyss Watchers are dueling like tired warriors, as if they have been going on for centuries. An item that drops after you defeat them, the souls of the blood of the wolf, explains what they really are. It describes the Abyss Watchers as a legion of undead warriors who bound themselves to the task of hunting down the abyss wherever it appeared, binding themselves to a purpose, a single purpose that would soon consume their legion with their lives. This matches up with a legend in the world of Dark Souls, Artorias the Abyss Walker, because his legacy is what inspired their legion. They even fight like Artorias. They have similar equipment. They borrowed this wolf symbolism too. They chose this based on their belief to walk on the same doomed road that was walked on by a legendary knight who fell, who was consumed by the darkness in an attempt to contain it. Over time, the abyss that they swore to destroy seeped into their ranks and into their souls. Their souls were consumed by it, one by one. All the Watchers fell to the darkness, and they became what they hunted and watched over. The region where they reside, Farron Keep itself, stands as evidence of their fall to the abyss, as it's consumed by decay. The Watchers didn't abandon their post or leave Farron's Keep behind, but they remained. They turned their blades on each other as corruption took over them. When the fight actually begins, a Watcher rises to fight you first. You clash your weapon against his. As the boss's health bar goes down, it reaches the halfway point. Then, another Watcher rises from the pile. But there's a difference between this gank fight and the other gank fights, because some Watchers attack you, but some of them attack each other. This happens because they are consumed by the abyss. They are no longer capable of recognizing enemies and allies. They can't tell the difference. The only thing that they see is bloodthirst and violence. When you end the first phase of the fight, another single Watcher rises, this time with fire in all his attacks. This single Watcher carries the will of the Legion. The fire that's been added to his attacks reflects the Watcher's status as a Lord of Cinder, a title which is only earned by linking the flame, something which they all did together. As you move through Farron Keep, getting closer to the Abyss Watchers, something is already happening long before the fog wall appears. The game lets you hear the Abyss Watchers well before you ever see the fog wall leading to the boss fight. You can hear the steel clashes of them fighting in the boss arena. This is pure world building and storytelling at its peak. As you push through the catacombs of Karthus, you meet High Lord Wolnir. Past all the trap-heavy corridors and rolling skeleton balls, until a large goblet appears before you. When you interact with the goblet, it pulls you into a dark, fog-filled space. In front of you stands High Lord Wolnir, who is being consumed by the abyss-like dark. In the lore, Wolnir was a tyrant, a conqueror who ruled through war. He was terrified of death and the darkness, so he clung to his life desperately, using relics like the golden bracelet on his arm to hold back the abyss. Remember the golden bracelet? It'll come in handy later in the boss fight. Wolnir's fight completely relies on his huge size and the surrounding darkness, which pushes you towards the lethal fog, which drains all your health. Wolnir also summons a pack of skeletons along with these swipes to push you towards death into the lethal dark fog. When you hit Wolnir, it does barely any damage to him. This fight is actually a trick fight. The way to beat this boss is by actually being observant. Remember the bracelets? The bracelets that were stopping him from being pulled into the abyss? Those bracelets are the key to defeating Wolnir. If you stay on his hands to break the bracelets down, huge chunks of his health are removed until he collapses and is pulled into the darkness by the abyss. This works because the glowing bracelets had the holy power keeping him from being consumed by the abyss. When you shatter the bracelets, his protection is ripped off, and he is pulled into the darkness, consumed by the abyss. The old Demon King is the smoldering lake beneath the catacombs of Karthus, which is a completely optional area. The way you reach this area is by breaking the bridge before the Wolnir boss fight. The area is a wide circular lake bed with burnt and scorched ground. There are burning fire zones that cause damage if you step onto them, so they must be avoided. In the world of Dark Souls 3, unlike the other games, demons are actually a dying species. The boss who stands before you is the last true demon-level king who remains, clinging to life. You can see it in his design. He is old, his posture is heavy too. The animations are filled with long pauses. The second phase of the fight only adds to this, as it is literally him burning himself. It feels like you caught the old Demon King as he was slowly turning to death. The fight mostly happens in 3 layers. You need to manage your distance, as this boss has a wide weapon arc and can trigger explosions. And these explosions and wide weapon arcs turn into kill zones. Once you have his health low enough, he brings out his second phase with bigger flamers and wider swings. If you are actually struggling through this boss because of the fire damage, here's a quick solution. Just equip the Flame Stone Plate, and maybe carry a high fire absorption shield like the Black Knight shield to block sometimes, rather than tanking the hits. When the old Demon King falls to roughly 5 to 10% health, his pattern flips. Instead of escalating, he compresses all remaining power into one massive fire detonation with a wide radius and lethal damage. If you mistime a roll or linger, it can end the attempt. After the blast, his fire fades. Several flame attacks disappear. His tempo drops. Swings lose coordination. He staggers, kneels, and struggles to rise, often reduced to weak slams and tired swipes until he collapses. Pontiff Sulyvahn waits for you in the Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, inside the Church of Irithyll at the end of the route. With the entry into the boss arena, you are welcomed with a line of church benches. In the center, Pontiff Sulyvahn waits in a moonlit church. His lore is understood through item descriptions. Sulyvahn was once a young sorcerer who went beneath Irithyll Valley to find the profaned capital and the unfading profaned flame, which lit a flame within him, a flame of ambition. With this ambition to rule, he seized Irithyll's pulpit, reshaped its orders and knights to his design, and even caged an old royal god in an abandoned cathedral to be offered to the Devourer. He replaced the old remnants of the divine rule with his own authority. The way he controlled the knights was through the 2 rings, Pontiff's left eye and Pontiff's right eye. The rings have black orbs in them which lure their bearers into endless battle until the knights turn frenzied and bestial, a deliberate corruption that makes soldiers into tools. An example of this ring working on the knights is the Dancer and Vordt. Vordt was an Outrider knight turned into the beast because of the Pontiff's rings. In the first phase of the fight, he wields a flaming greatsword in his right hand and a sorcerer's blade in his left. His attacks include long strings, fast chains, and small healing windows. However, with many of his attacks, they are simply parryable, just like the Gwyn fight. So for the veterans, it's just a little parry test and is quite easy. After landing your parries and bringing him down to about half the health, his second phase starts. In the second phase, Pontiff Sulyvahn calls a spectral double that mirrors his attacks with a slight delay, turning every dodge into a double dodge problem. While you can burst the clone during the summon to relieve pressure, you cannot escape his clone completely and end the fight. After you slay Pontiff, he drops his soul. The soul splits in two transpositions. The profaned greatsword, a heavy blade bound to the flame he found that can kindle itself for a burst of fire. The greatsword of judgment, a moon blue weapon that buffs and throws a magic arc. These weapons represent the Pontiff perfectly. One weapon speaks to where he came from, the ambition sparked by the profaned flame, and the other to what he became, a judge wielding sorcery. Pontiff's death has an interesting twist, dependent upon how you kill him. If you finish Pontiff Sulyvahn with a repose and a killing blow, you don't see his normal boss death animation. Instead, you see something different. He slumps forward, loses balance, lets both blades fall from his hands, and fades away slowly. Miss any link in that chain or kill him with standard weapon hits, spells, bleed, or chip, you get the regular death animation instead. After you finish off Pontiff Sulyvahn, you head towards the profaned capital, the place where Sulyvahn found the unfading profaned flame. At the end of this area, you fight the second Lord of Cinder in the game, Yhorm the Giant. You must fight him and bring his soul back to his throne. The area for Yhorm is a vast throne room, his own throne room, with a weapon lying next to his throne. Remember this weapon. In the lore, Yhorm was the ruler of the profaned capital. He was a tragic ruler who was doubted or feared despite his protection of his people, just because he was a giant. In all the Dark Souls games, we can see that the giants are a tragic race. All of the giants that we encounter in these games are in pitiful, tragic states. Yhorm too is in a similar state. Even though he loved his people and protected them, he was doubted and feared. So to overcome this doubt, Yhorm entrusted the people with the weapon that could slay him, just to reassure them. He had two such weapons, the Storm Ruler, whom he gave one of to the people who doubted him, and the other to a dear friend of his. The final sacrifice that Yhorm made for his people was to link the flame and sacrifice himself, all so that the cycle continues and the world can live on. However, it was of no use, because Pontiff and his followers harnessed the flame's power to corrupt the region, transforming its inhabitants into monsters, fueling his own rise to power. When you start the fight, you land your first hit. It does nothing to the giant. Another hit, it barely does any damage. This happens because this fight is built around the Storm Ruler, Yhorm's only weakness, which he left with the people and his trusted friend. But where do you find this weapon? Remember the weapon that was left next to his throne? That's the Storm Ruler. You were intended to use it to kill the giant. The Storm Ruler is a broken greatsword, holding the residual storm power whose weapon art is the Storm King, which is most effective against these giant enemies. In the fight, you're supposed to rush toward the throne and grab the Storm Ruler immediately to perform the weapon art at Yhorm to do any real damage to him. Beating Yhorm will drop you the soul of Yhorm, the giant, and his cinders, which are all required to finish the game. His soul transposes exactly into two items, Yhorm's great machete and Yhorm's great shield. Remember the dear friend that Yhorm entrusted the Storm Ruler with? That's Siegward and Katarina. If that name sounds familiar to you, then yes, he is considered to be the descendant of Siegmeyer from Dark Souls 1. Siegward has an entire quest line that's connected to Yhorm. You first cross paths with Siegward in the Undead Settlement. Here, he is trying to figure out his way through the elevator. Help him here, and later help him fight the fire demon. After the fight, he starts calling you a true friend. Later, you see him again in the Cathedral of the Deep, where he again needs your help against a certain trickster, Patches. Help him there too, and next you meet him in the Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. This time, you find him dozing between fighting and cooking up Estus soup. Finally, the last encounter to complete the quest. You meet him in the Irithyll dungeon, where you free him from a locked cell so he can finally keep the old vow that's been hanging over his story since the first Storm Ruler changed hands. Now, when you walk into the Profaned after helping Sigurd, a cutscene plays. He walks in with you, drawing his own Storm Ruler to assist you in the fight against the giant. If you complete this quest line, the two of you fulfill Yhorm's final plan to be stopped. One blade left to calm the people, and the other blade with a friend of his own demise. After the fight is over, Sigurd toasts to a promise he kept to his friend, and rests next to his friend's throne. When you return to the boss arena after the fight, Sigurd's armor and a Siegbrow are left behind. Yhorm is a little different from all the bosses in the Dark Souls franchise. Among all the bosses across the Dark Souls franchise, Yhorm the Giant sits at the top for raw HP. He has a base HP pool of about 27,800, which is the highest in the franchise. For the sake of comparison, heavy hitters like Slave Knight Gael and Darkeater Midir have roughly 15,000 HP. Yhorm literally has almost double the health of bosses that are considered enormous. Yhorm truly is a giant compared to the other bosses. The next Lord of Cinder you face after putting Yhorm to rest is Aldrich, Devourer of Gods. Aldrich sits in Anor Londo. When you enter his arena, there is a sense of familiarity at the back of your mind. You fight Aldrich inside the same cathedral hall where you fought Ornstein and Smough. Another layer of familiarity comes from Aldrich himself, because the sludge-bodied mass carries the same look as the Dark Moon Gwyndolin. Aldrich fights you with the same weapon as Gwyndolin too. In the lore, Aldrich brooded over the fading flame and dreamed of an age of the deep sea. So he resorted to consuming humans, eventually consuming gods too. That's how he got the title of Devourer of Gods. The Dark Moon longbow description says that Gwyndolin was eaten, and the Pontiff's soul states that Sulyvahn had imprisoned a god of old royalty to feed the Devourer. This likely means that Gwyndolin was caged by the Pontiff and was fed to Aldrich. This explains the look Aldrich has and his attacks. In the fight, Aldrich keeps teleporting and repositioning himself away from you, very reminiscent of Dark Moon Gwyndolin. He shifts through all the tar in the arena and reappears across the room. He also has arrow volleys and sorcery attacks like Gwyndolin. As his health drops to about 50%, Phase 2 starts, indicated by his weapon being engulfed in fire. In this phase, the arrow volley tracks you for longer, and his casts are more aggressive, persistent sorcery spells. If this fight feels a little tough, you must note that Aldrich is weak to fire and thrust damage. So, fire-buffed thrusting weapons and pyromancies would burst through his health faster than your normal physical attacks and sorceries. Beating Aldrich drops the soul of Aldrich and Cinders of a Lord, and his soul transposes into two choices that mirror the body he consumed and the hunger that drove him: the Dark Moon longbow and the Life Hunt scythe. You meet Anri of Astora in the rows of sacrifices at the crossing between the Cathedral of the Deep and Farron Keep. Her story is directly connected to Aldrich. From the first time you talk to her, her goal is clear. She's an unkindled, hunting the Lords of Cinder. Her primary target? Aldrich. Across different encounters, Anri keeps repeating that Aldrich took everything and must be killed. Many lines in her quest and item description tell us that people dear to Anri were among the people who were consumed by Aldrich in his quest for power. So her entire journey is all about taking revenge. Henri travels with Horus the Hushed, who later turns hostile in the Smoldering Lake. This makes Henri question where he is. Both their paths run through territory shaped by Pontiff Sulyvahn and his cult, since Sulyvahn serves Aldrich's interests and exerts control across Smoldering Lake routes and Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. If you successfully progress her quest, a sign summoning of hers appears in Anor Londo right outside Aldrich's Fort Gate. If you accept the sign, you are summoned into Henri's world to help defeat Aldrich. When you beat him alongside Henri, you are rewarded with her straight sword. This also unlocks a new possible ending for the game where you marry Henri. But if you do not help Henri, she will attempt to fight alone. If this is the case, she is found dead. Henri's survival or death depends directly on whether Aldrich is defeated with your assistance. No other NPC is tied this close to a Lord of Cinder. The NPC of Henri is implemented in two versions, one male and one female. Henri of Astoros gender is always the opposite of the player's chosen gender. This swap includes distinct voice acting and presentation for each version, while keeping the quest the same. The parity holds even on the Londo route, where the player performs the marriage rituals as part of Yuria of Londo's storyline, meaning the ceremony, rewards, and world state changes occur with either male Henri or female Henri exactly as scripted. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley is found in the cathedral room where Emma lives on the high wall of Lothric. The game treats her like a gatekeeper and not just a random NPC. In a normal progression, she only becomes available after you have defeated the first 3 Lords of Cinders, but if you kill Emma early, the boss fight starts right there in the same room. Defeating the Dancer opens the way into Lothric Castle from the cathedral. In the lore, the Dancer is tied to the Pontiff. The descriptions of the items talk about how the Pontiff has bestowed a double-bladed sword upon a distant daughter of the former royal family and ordered her to serve first as a dancer and then as an Outrider Knight. This was the Dancer of the Boreal Valley. Her weapon description adds that the paired blades are symbolic of her vows and carry dark magic in the right hand and fire in the left, mirroring the Pontiff's own duality. The fight is built around her swings, which are in off timings. On top of that, there are 2 different damage types, the fire and the dark. Also, the room itself becomes a part of the fight, as it is open with pillars, and that is your solution to the massive swings. In the first phase, the dancer stays close to single blade pressure with sweeping arcs, lunges, and grabs that punish backward rolls. So the spacing becomes staying close enough that her tracking does not drag you into the worst angles, while still respecting follow-ups so you are not clipped on delayed hits. At around half health, she draws the second sword and the whole fight stretches out into long multi-hit chains where hitboxes overlap and safe heal windows shrink unless you disengage on purpose. Phase 2 is defined by those extended spinning dance sequences that can cover a huge portion of the room and is commonly handled by creating distance and using pillars as temporary safety until the combo burns out. For her weakness, she's known to be weak to strike damage, lightning, and dark. When she finally falls, she drops the soul of the dancer, which transposes into either Dancer's enchanted swords or the soothing sunlight miracle, the same 2-part identity again, one reward tied to her vows and blades, the other tied to the kind of holy power she was forced to serve around. The Dragonslayer Armour is fought on the bridge in Lothric Castle, right before the entrance to the Grand Archives. You must beat this hunk of old armor to walk into the Archives bonfire, which sits right after the boss. The armor is a suit of Dragonslayer armor that looks awfully similar to an old legend from the past, known for slaying dragons. But the important detail is that it is being controlled by the pilgrim butterflies hovering above Lothric Castle, which is why it feels like a puppet guarding the archives rather than a living knight. He carries around a huge shield, a shield with lightning. The Dragonslayer Armour applies pressure to you in 3 ways. Firstly, there is the melee damage while he is dueling you. He does wild swings, great axe cleaves, shield attacks, and punishments if you don't keep moving. Second is the arena risk. The bridge is long, open, and edged. Careless movements can get you knocked off the bridge and you can die. Lastly, in the fight, the Dragonslayer Armour also gets ranged support from the Pilgrim Butterflies that become active during Phase 2, adding ranged attacks on top of the melee pressure from the armor. The butterflies come in Phase 2 and use small orb volleys and a larger orb attack with distinct screeches as cues. The practical effect is that healing windows shrink since you now have to respect the armor's melee while also dodging ranged pressure from above. When it falls, it drops the soul of Dragonslayer Armour, which transposes into exactly 2 items: the Dragonslayer's Great Axe and the Dragonslayer's Great Shield, both described as melted iron pieces that once formed part of the Dragonslayer Armour. Unlike the bosses in Dark Souls, the Dragonslayer Armour is actually parryable just like Gwyn, but this parry is executed only under very specific rules. If the Great Axe is done one-handed, it can be parried. So, like one-handed horizontal swings, diagonal chops, and standard single arm cleaves where it is clearly equipped in one hand. Two-handed Great Axe attacks do not parry. Shield bashes also do not parry. Anything that looks like an AoE, like lightning bursts, ground shockwaves, do not parry. The reason people miss it is that the boss looks huge, fully armored, and looks like a construct. A lot of large enemies in Dark Souls 3 are completely unparryable. This fight happens late enough that most players stop testing parries on something that big. That's why people miss it and never realize that the Dragonslayer Armour is parryable. Oceiros, the Consumed King, is one of the optional bosses in Dark Souls 3. He is found through an intricate number of steps. You don't just stumble upon him. Here's how you reach Oceiros, the Consumed King. You defeat Dancer of the Boreal Valley. You take the Basin of Vows that drop afterward. You place it on the statue in the room behind her arena, and a hidden ladder appears. That ladder leads you down into the Consumed King's garden, making Oceiros an optional boss that is literally gated behind mid-game progression and a hidden route. In the lore, Oceiros is established as the former king of Lothric. He is associated with Seath the Scaleless, his pursuit of immortality, ancient knowledge known through dragon sorcery. Oceiros is someone who's abandoned the royal doctrine to pursue forbidden research. The title Consumed makes sense too, because you fight a pale, twisted semi-draconic body that crawls rather than walks and whispers while attacking. A part of the fight that everyone remembers, he speaks constantly to an unseen infant called Ocelot. The interesting part about Ocelot is that the game never shows the child, yet Oceiros speaks as if holding a baby, reacts as if the baby exists, but you can also hear the cries of a baby while fighting him. At a certain point, his tone shifts in a way that implies loss, while the game never confirms whether the child is physically present, invisible, or a delusion, leaving only one thing confirmed by what you hear and see, which is that Oceiros believes Ocelot exists. The fight is like fighting a beast with sorcery mixed in there, rather than a simple mage duel. He moves slowly with wide tail attacks, claw arcs, short charges, and first breath. He deals both heavy, physical, and frost damage. Around half health, he roars, changing his pacing. He shifts into a different, faster set. In the middle of the fight, Oceiros also kills Ocelot, or more like sacrifices Ocelot. Oceiros drops his soul, and his transposition weapon is the Moonlight Greatsword. It is the same weapon that you get after cutting Seath's tail in Dark Souls 1. This matches with Seath's connection to Oceiros. The Moonlight Greatsword is also a signature weapon across almost all the From Software games like Kingsfield, Bloodborne, and even Armored Core. You find a similar weapon in all those games. This boss also carries a piece of cut content. In early development data, Oceiros was labeled as Dragon Angel. Under this label, the boss already existed in near final form with a model, animations, and even most of the dialogue structure, meaning the shift to Consumed King was more like a rename and a change, just to the title rather than a full redesign. You can also find solid evidence that his arena was not always locked to him, since early pre-release material and later documentation points to Gundyr being placed in Ocelot's garden space during development. This confirms that the garden existed earlier as a usable boss stage and that From Software shuffled boss placement before the final version settled. The arena also looked a little different, with an astral sword spread all around the boss arena. The most unsettling cut change is Ocelot, because in early builds, the baby was visible in the intro cutscene, all along with camera angles that showed what Oceiros was reacting to. And then before release, the retail version was altered so the baby is never shown at all, with the camera avoiding it and the child becoming invisible. So the player can never visually confirm anything, even though Oceiros still behaves as if he is holding and speaking to a real infant. Data miners and analysis show a 3D model of Ocelot. That model is an infant-sized humanoid with a head and limbs and newborn proportions. And in the restored alpha intro, you can literally see Oceiros holding what looks like a newborn in his arms instead of cradling empty air. After beating Oceiros, the Consumed King, another optional boss and an optional area unlock. The game hides a whole second optional route right behind him. You leave Oceiros' arena, head down the corridor, and smack an illusory wall that opens the way into Untended Graves, a secret optional zone that immediately feels wrong, because it contains a dark alternative version of Firelink Shrine that players call Dark Firelink. That area even had its own key loot path, since you can find the eyes of Firekeeper inside the Dark Shrine, tucked away behind another illusory wall. The eyes of a Firekeeper are a key item required to unlock an alternate ending. In the Untended Graves, we also have the next optional boss, Champion Gundyr. He sits in the same place as Iudex Gundyr, the tutorial boss that you fight at the beginning of the game. Champion Gundyr is essentially the same boss as Iudex Gundyr, except stronger, faster, and more aggressive. You find him kneeling in a candle-lit circle, guarding the approach to the Dark Shrine, the same way Iudex guarded the start of your journey. Champion Gundyr does not do the Abyss-style transformation that Iudex does, so the fight stays grounded in pure pressure and physical combat rather than switching forms, which makes him feel like the version that never got corrupted and never needed the mutation to stay dangerous. When you defeat him, he drops the soul of Champion Gundyr, and that soul transposes into exactly 2 items, Gundyr's halberd and Prisoner's chain. So the reward at the end of this hidden route is either his weapon or a ring that reflects the same restrained, hardened theme that runs through both versions of Gundyr. The next optional boss and the location areas are tied to Dark Souls 3's secret optional area, which you reach using a gesture. Here's how you reach Archdragon Peak to beat the boss, Ancient Wyvern. First, you have to defeat Oceiros, the Consumed King. Then, you take the path of the dragon gesture from that area, and only after you have that gesture do you go to Irithyll Dungeon, find the Dragonkin statue or corpse at the right spot, and use Path of the Dragon right next to it, which is what actually triggers the transport and opens Archdragon Peak. Once you are transported to Archdragon Peak, you pass through the large gate and start the boss encounter. However, this boss fight is structured as a hostile run through the level to reach a specific plunge point above the Wyvern. It is not a normal boss duel. During the encounter, the Wyvern's direct threats are large area fire breaths and massive physical hitboxes that punish staying in front of it or getting clipped while moving through the space. The real pressure comes from the enemies between you and the plunge platform, since the route forces you through tight walkways. After you defeat the ancient Wyvern, you receive the Dragon Head Stone, which is not what you usually get after defeating a boss. The Dragon Head Stone, when used, turns your character's head into a dragon. The best part? It lets you breathe fire like a dragon. The last optional boss and the coolest of them all in the base game lies at the end of Archdragon Peak. Again, the way you trigger this boss is not the most obvious. It is not like the other optional bosses in Dark Souls. To reach the Nameless King, you have to push Archdragon Peak all the way to its highest endpoint, because the fight is locked behind the Great Belfry and the bell lever there. After you enter Archdragon Peak and clear the area's first major great encounter, you keep moving forward through the main route until you reach the later section of that zone that leads you up toward the Belfry complex, climbing higher as the paths narrow into walkways. Eventually, you arrive at the Great Belfry area itself, where the massive bell structure dominates the space, and the game gives you a bonfire nearby, which is the clear signal that you are at the trigger point. From there, you walk up to the lever at the Great Belfry and pull it to ring the bell. Ringing it reveals the path out into the clouds and opens the way to the arena, so the route forward literally appears in front of you as the confrontation begins. When you follow that newly revealed cloud path to step into the Nameless King fight. Lore-wise, the Nameless King is described as a former dragon-slaying god of war who gave up everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. Hence, his presence at the end of Archdragon Peak makes sense. His headgear pushes more on that same identity. The Golden Crown description calls it the crown of a nameless king who was an ally to the ancient dragons. It adds the important detail that it closely resembled the First Lord. This is a clean connection between Dark Souls 1's final boss, Gwyn, and the Nameless King from Dark Souls 3. He is described as a former god of war who later allied himself with the ancient dragons. If you jump back to Dark Souls 1, Gwyn's firstborn is described with the same traits: a god of war, a dragon slayer, and a leader of Gwyn's armies. Dark Souls 1 establishes that Gwyn's firstborn had his name erased from history. He was a traitor for siding with dragons, so his statues and records were stripped clean. Dark Souls 3 calls him a nameless king. What else could be a title that tells you that he was erased from history? The boss's moveset, too, tells you that he is the son of Gwyn. He uses lightning spears, lightning bolts, and thunder-based miracles, just like Gwyn and his signature element. The boss fight has two phases. Phase 1 is King of the Storm, where the Nameless King rides a storm drake. The whole fight is you dealing with a mounted target that controls space from above. Once Drake goes down, the flight goes into Phase 2, where it is just the Nameless King on foot, still built around heavy lightning pressure, but now paired with long melee strings that land late and punish early rolls. When the Nameless King falls down, he drops the souls of the Nameless King, which transposes into 3 rewards: the Storm-Curved Sword, the Dragonslayer Sword Spear, and the Miracle Lightning Storm. Once you clear the road through the last gates and step fully into Lothric Castle, this is the kingdom's political center, the seat of royal power, where the royal family and the royal knights reside. Placing the last Lord of Cinder at the end of it all makes the last of the final authority of Lothric. To even approach them, you are forced through the Grand Archives first. After the Archives interior, the route stops being a corridor and turns into an ascent, pushing you up across rooftops. Then you finally reach their arena. It is an enclosed chamber set high within the castle, isolated with no attendants, no ceremony, no visible governance at all, which is the cleanest structural statements the game makes about the last Lord of Cinder. Instead of showing rulers in control, it shows the twin princes separated from the kingdom they represent, sitting at the top of Lothric's hierarchy while being completely alone inside its highest inner room. Lothric and Lorien are the last Lords of Cinders. You must defeat them to complete the game. In the lore, Lothric, the younger prince, is the one who was chosen. He was raised to link the first flame. The royal structure of Lothric Castle was built around that expectation. However, he refused to do the very thing he was supposed to do on purpose. It was a deliberate rejection of the linking tradition. Hence, you are sent to retrieve him and drag the kingdom's intended successor back toward the kiln. Lorien is the other half of the fight. He is another failure. Lorien, the other prince, was the elder and originally expected heir. Item descriptions explicitly tie him to defeating the demon prince, then being broken afterward, with consequences that are visible every second you fight him, since his legs are crippled, his speech is lost, and his body is scarred. Both brothers share the curse of linking the flame that they both avoided. In the fight, when Lorien drops, Lothric brings him back. So as long as Lothric remains alive, Lorien cannot die or be defeated. So the fight turns into a representation of their intertwined fate. In the fight, Lothric is physically frail and stays off the front line. He casts spells, heals, and even resurrects Lorien. He uses his brother as a shield. Lorien, on the other hand, is the opposite. He's a frontline combatant who is aggressive and relentless, who uses physical attacks. When you finally win, the boss drops the soul of the twin princes and the cinders of a lord, because Lothric is one of the required lord targets, tied directly to the endgame. That soul can be transposed into two weapons, Lorien Greatsword and Lothric Holy Sword. The first weapon, Lorien's Greatsword, reflects the Elder Prince's heavy melee identity with his fire attack. The second weapon, Lothric's Holy Sword, reflects the younger prince's magic-focused princely identity. The best part of this soul drop is that the game lets you fuse them into a single combined weapon, the Twin Prince's Greatsword. The best part is that even after you have the Twin Prince's Greatsword, the story of that soul still has one more weird footprint in the game's files, because there is a fully defined weapon entry called Lothric's Scythe, sitting in Dark Souls 3's data with its own valid internal ID. It is even labeled alongside boss-type weapons in the file structure, just like the soul transposition rewards. It includes a full item description, written in the same style as other transposed weapons. The description states, "The scythe is born from the soul of Lothric, which was forged specifically for Prince Lothric." It looks long and elegant, reinforced by a hard alloy edge, designed to cut more cleanly than an ordinary scythe. Once you finish the Twin Princes, the game shifts you to the Kiln of the First Flame. You reach the Kiln of the First Flame after placing all the cinders of a lord on their thrones in Filing Shrine. Then, you let the Firekeeper perform the rite that sends you to the kiln. The Kiln of the First Flame is the resting ground for the First Flame and its guardian, the final boss of Dark Souls 3, Soul of Cinder. In the lore, it is a deific manifestation of the Lords of Cinders, who once linked the First Flame. The Soul of Cinder represents the accumulated linked firepower of all the lords who have linked the flame in the past, which means every Lord of Cinder who fed the cycle is now part of this one guardian, an entity that can reach for the abilities of previous champions, even though it looks like an empty husk with no personal identity of its own. The Soul of Cinder exists as the flame's last defense inside the kiln. It is there to stop anyone from reaching the first flame without being tested. The boss itself, the Soul of Cinder, is a tall warrior, a badly worn warrior, with charred armor carrying the Firelink Greatsword, which is just a large version of the coiled sword. This weapon can change its shape according to the wishes of the Soul of Cinder. When you first enter the arena, the Soul of Cinder is sitting in the middle of the arena with its sword planted before it is within the first flame. It's just like you sitting at a bonfire. As you approach it, it stands, pulls the sword out of the ground, and the boss fight starts. When you engage in battle with the Guardian of the First Flame, you notice something about the boss. It never commits to a single style of fighting for too long. Soul of Cinder has 4 separate weapon stances. Most of the time, it opens in the standard straight sword stance, which has quick slashes and thrusts. The other weapon stance you see is the scimitar and the pyromancy stance. In this stance, he becomes faster and performs backflips as if equipped with a Darkwood grain ring. This stance also gives him the ability to repose like a player while also adding up pyromaniacs like Power Within, Great Combustion, Great Chaos Fire Orb, and Poison Mist. The next weapon stance is the Pike and Miracle stance. Now he can perform quick thrusts, slow lunges with miracles like the Wrath of Gods, Secret Oath, Heal, and Bountiful Light. In this stance, the boss can heal itself and perform attack buffs, which can be applied to the other stances. The final stance, Staff and Sorceries, which fills the arena with spells. Now the boss can throw out Crystal Soul Spear, Farron Hail, Homing Crystal Soul Mass, Soul Stream, Soul Greatsword, and Great Farron Dart. His different weapon stances represent all the people who have linked the flame before you. This means you feel like you are fighting all the different people who have linked the flame before you. It feels like you are fighting the full force of all the Lords of Cinders from the past. When the boss reaches around half health, Phase 2 starts. The Soul of Cinder bursts into a damaging explosion of fire, and his health bar is restored to full health. It abandons the stance rotation and brings its sword back to its default form, shifting into a moveset similar to Gwyn. This phase brings in a set of Sunlight Spear variations that are easy to recognize once you have seen them once, because it can hurl a standard Sunlight Spear straight at you. It can throw one up into the air to seed the sky, and after a short delay, a cloud forms above the arena and you hear a thunderclap before a shower of homing Sunlight Spears rains down from that cloud for massive damage. Plus, it can also drive a Sunlight Spear into the ground to create a small lightning-heavy area of effect on impact, similar in behavior to Lightning Stake. The attacks are just like Gwyn's attacks. However, the Soul of Cinder adds a quick combo that literally juggles you into the air if you are caught. When the Soul of Cinder goes down, it gives you the Soul of the Lords. That soul transposes into 2 options. One is the Firelink Greatsword, a straight sword wreathed in fire. The other is Sunlight Spear, a powerful lightning miracle associated with Gwyn. After that, there is no next boss. There is only the first flame and your choice. Once the Guardian is gone, you decide what happens next. You can link the fire, you can let the fire fade, or you can usurp the fire if you have met the conditions. The Soul of Cinder is the last obstacle before that decision. The Soul of Cinder is the last boss guarding that decision. The next boss is one that a lot of players have never even realized exists, because Champions Gravetender and Gravetender Greatwolf sits completely off the main path as an optional fight inside Ashes of Ariandel. Just getting to the DLC in the first place is optional, since it starts when you speak to Slave Knight Gael at the Cleansing Chapel bonfire in the Cathedral of the Deep. This pulls you into the Painted World. Once you're inside the Painted World of Ariandel, the boss is in the depths of the painting. You reach it by progressing down the depths route from the Rope Bridge area, following the path that drops you lower and lower until you finally step into the boss space, where the Champion's Gravetender and the Gravetender Greatwolf are waiting. In the lore, the boss is a defender of a grave. Long ago, an undead declared a tournament in which their fellow cursed souls would battle to the repeated death, with their worth being measured in deaths. This was seen as a gift to the undead, who go hollow without a purpose, and a fight with no end was considered by some to be a glorious use of their immortality. The champion of the undead match eventually went mad and at some point died. As they had stayed with him in life, the younger fighter training under the champion and a large wolf stayed to protect the sanctity of this grave and were eventually drawn into the painted world of Ariandel, where they utilized frost sorceries to continue their task. The boss fight itself starts like two-stage boss fights. An NPC ambushes and then turns into a beast fight in the middle. Stage 1 opens with Champion Gravetender attacking you with 3 wolves. The Gravetender himself fights with the Valorheart weapon set. The core of his kit plays like an aggressive sword and shield duel. He also mixes in sorceries in the fight. Then Stage 2 starts when the Gravetender signals for help to the Gravetender Greatwolf. This changes the fight, and now you are fighting 2 bosses. One extra detail that makes the Greatwolf feel like it belongs to the painted world rather than being invented for the arena is that you can encounter the same Greatwolf earlier outside the boss fight. If you deal enough damage there, it retreats instead of dying. So by the time it shows up in the arena, it reads like a returning threat rather than a brand new summon. When you finally win, the drops are weirdly practical for such a hidden fight, because you get Valorheart and Champion's Bones. Valorheart is the same weapon set the Gravetender fights with, so the reward is basically the boss's own sword and shield kit handed straight to you. Champion's Bones are the other payoff, and they have a very specific purpose, because they are the item used to unlock Undead Match, the arena mode for PvP. The next and final boss of the DLC is Sister Friede, who is fought in the same chapel where you meet her peacefully in the painted world of Ariandel. The arena is the familiar chapel space, which only unlocks once you're done with the DLC completely. In the lore, Sister Friede was an unkindled who arrived at the painted world. She abandoned the linking of the fire and sided with Father Ariandel. She quickly rose to a position of authority inside the painting while actively working to stop the one thing the painted world normally relies on to survive. The painted world is traditionally sustained through a cycle where it is burned and then renewed. So, rot is not the final stage in that system. It is the stage that gets reset. But Friede rejects that entire idea and treats renewal by fire as something to be prevented rather than accepted, which is why her goal is not to protect the painting so it can be reborn. Her goal is to keep it from being burned at all. Sister Friede has convinced him to suppress the fire completely, so instead of the world being allowed to restart, it stagnates, and the decay becomes the permanent condition, with the painting left to rot, because Friede believes it should remain that way rather than be reset by flame. In the fight itself, Sister Friede has a 3-phase-based structure. Phase 1 is Friede alone. It is built around speed, with fast scythe strings, high mobility, constant repositioning, plus the invisibility mechanic, where she vanishes mid-fight. You are expected to track her through what the arena gives you, since she leaves frost trails and audio cues that hint at where she moved. After beating her, Phase 2 adds Father Ariandel. He fights like a slow-moving boss, smashing the ground with a massive bowl, throwing out large fire attacks that punish Sting in one spot. She also heals Ariandel. In this phase, the fight only ends when Ariandel's health is depleted. Once he falls, Friede collapses. Now, the final phase, where the chapel changes again, Sister Friede gets back up. Now, Black Flame Friede. Now, her scythe is infused with black flame. When you finally put Sister Friede down after all 3 phases, you receive the soul of Sister Friede and the ashes of Ariandel, which is the key item tied to finishing what has been stuck. The soul can be transposed into 2 transpositions. One is Friede's Great Scythe, the weapon that matches her entire identity. The other, the Rose of Ariandel, ties back to Father Ariandel's role. The Demon Prince is the first fight in the Ringed City DLC. You reach it through the Dreg Heap from within the Earthen Peak Ruins bonfire. You walk out, you follow the route ahead, and you drop straight down into a massive arena pit. The moment your feet hit that floor, the encounter begins, turning what looked like normal traversal into the opening of the Demon Prince's boss fight. In the lore, Demon Princes are last in the demon kind. The game keeps pointing back to the idea that demon power is a fading legacy after the decline of the Chaos Flame, so by the time you reach this fight, it does not feel like you are meeting a thriving species. It feels like you are meeting whatever is still burning simply because it has not gone out yet. The lore references around the Demon Prince point that they were defeated by Lorraine, after which they retreated. In the aftermath, the memory of the flame within it was lost, which explains why demonkind is in an end state. Phase 1 is a duo fight against Demon in Pain and Demon from Below. The design looks like this, usually one pushing in while the other controls space, then they switch. The main challenge is spacing and camera control when their bodies and hitboxes overlap. Phase 2 starts when one dies. When that happens, the other absorbs the remaining power, becoming Demon Prince. Kill order changes Phase 2. If Demon from Below becomes Demon Prince, it gets a long laser-style attack. The other kill order produces the Meteor Rain variant. In Phase 2, Demon Prince has heavier commitments and a bigger arena of denial. The longer animations can be punished if you survive the first hitbox. The laser variant is especially punishable up close, but if it's slightly off angle, the beam tracks poorly at point-blank range. When you win, the boss drops the soul of the Demon Prince. That soul has 2 transposition outcomes. You can turn it into Demon Scar, or you can turn it into the Pyromancy Seething Chaos. The arena you drop into for the Demon Prince is built from the ruins of Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1, down to the familiar circular stone center where the old bonfire space used to be. So the game is basically staging this last demon set piece in the place that once acted as the series' original hub. That little location choice also clears up a common mix-up, because the Soul of Cinder fight has its own endpoint in the kiln, while this Firelink ruin shows up here in the Dreg Heap as the ground zero for the Demon Prince confrontation. This boss sits in the Church of Filianor, right after the bridge sequence near the shared grave bonfire, where Darkeater Midir shows up. Once you push past the stretch and enter the church, you enter a boss fight. The fight starts with Judicator Argo, and his whole job is summoning, since he opens by calling in a Painting Guardian, then brings in the actual boss as a Spear of the Church Defender. The Defender can be 2 different things depending on your situation, because if you are online and a Covenant player gets pulled in, you fight a real player acting as the Spear, while if you are offline or nobody is available, the game uses Halflight, Spear of the Church, instead. In the lore, Halflight is a missionary from Ulusil who came to the Church of Filianor, then chose to stay behind as a defender to preserve Filianor's slumber. His survival into the present marks him as undead, which places him back around the era when Ulusil fell to the abyss before the chosen undead's journey. Seeing that collapse is the clean reason his role makes sense, because he ends up guarding a sleeping saint tied to the continuation of the Age of Fire. The church is not defended by him alone. The guardians of the church protect Filianor's sleep alongside the spears, though few remain. Their outfit matches the old painted world of Ariamis guardians, and their signature tool is throwing shivs, which is why the fight often feels like a protected duelist rather than a solo boss. The optional boss in the DLC, Darkeater Midir, is a little difficult to start. To reach him, you must have a few encounters before you walk into his arena. You first meet Midir at the bridge ambush, where he shows up like an environmental hazard. You need to hit him until he backs off. First, you progress through the ringed city until you reach that long bridge section leading toward the ringed inner wall area. There, Midir drops and starts tearing the bridge. You need to deal enough damage to make him fall away. After that, you keep pushing through the city until you reach the shared grave bonfire. Then, the real route starts. From shared grave, you move forward into the open area with a big staircase. Find the small chapel-like building nearby. Go inside it for the lift. Ride it up, and while it is moving, step off onto the ledge opening. Follow the narrow path from that ledge to a ladder. Climb down and move into the room with a huge hole in the floor. Then drop into it, and that's your way into Darkeater Midir's arena. Midir's soul description calls him a descendant of the Archdragons, says he was raised by the gods, and says that because of his immortality, he was given a duty to eternally battle the dark, a duty he would never forget even after the gods perished. That makes the fight completely different, because after understanding that you are not just meeting a dragon, now you are meeting a creature built for an endless purpose of fighting the dark. When you look at him, it is clear that the dark has seeped into him. His body shows visible corruption. He also uses dark powers in the fight. When you finally fight Darkeater Midir for real, he has an extremely high health pool and strong defenses across almost his entire body. He has a high health pool of approximately 15,000, which is one of the highest in the whole game. His whole body has high defense. That is, except his head. The head is much more riskier to strike, as you're always close to his attack range. You can play it safe and attack his legs and tail, but that will take you about twice the time to finish off Midir. Once you finish off Midir, he is noted to drop the largest amount of souls from any boss in Dark Souls 3. If you tack the soul-boosting gear, like the covetous Silver Serpent Ring with the Shield of Want, his defeat will drop about 1 million souls, which is a ridiculous number. Darkeater Midir is a reference to From Software's Kingfield. Kingsfield has a dragon called Guira, who is also an ancient black dragon. Midir is a clear reference to one of From Software's earliest games, which was a blueprint to the whole Dark Souls franchise. In the whole DLC, Darkeater Midir can actually be spotted even before the boss fight. If you take a second to look up while you're moving through the area, you can actually spot him perched on one of the towers overlooking the city, just sitting there like he's been watching your route the whole time. The final boss of the Dark Souls franchise, the Slave Knight Gael, is at the end of the world. It is the literal end. Reaching him feels like walking to the far edge of the world, where everything is collapsing. After you rest at Filianol's Rest, you only have to take a short walk down to the thrones of the Pygmy Lords. That's where Gael is waiting. In the lore, Gael starts his story at the absolute bottom. His title says it all. A slave knight is an expandable frontline warrior from ancient wars, the kind of fighters who die with no status. Gael starts in the Age of Fire with nothing but a purpose he doesn't drop. You see that purpose early in the Painted World, where he serves Sister Friede. He asks you to burn the painting so it can be renewed, directly opposing Friede's plan to freeze it in rot. Gael has a clear goal in mind. It is the dark soul of man, the thing that originated with the Pygmies at the dawn of fire, the source of humanity and human darkness. Since the Dark Souls is fragmented across humanity, Gael started consuming everyone who carries those fragments in order to consolidate the Dark Soul within himself. This is to complete the pigment he needs to give the painter so the painter can create a new painted world. This is why he ends up at the literal end of the world, after the kingdoms collapse into ash. All the gods and lords are gone, but he survived through sheer will to continue his mission. When you reach him, his body is changed. It has mutated from the Dark Soul saturation. His blood is infused with the Dark Soul essence. Gael is now a living vessel holding the largest remaining concentration of it. Slave Knight Gael opens his fight by impaling a Pygmy Lord's corpse with a sword and throwing it at you, which is not just for shock value, because the exact corpse toss is a callback to the earlier boss from Dark Souls 1, Knight Artorias. Dark Souls has a lot of references to Berserk, and Slave Knight Gael is the perfect example of that, because his Phase 1 movement has that same feral forward-leaning aggression people like to associate with Guts in the Berserker armor. In Phase 2, the way Gael brings out the repeated crossbow is just like Guts using his repeater crossbow. When you beat Slave Knight Gael, he drops the blood of the Dark Soul. It is described as the blood that seeped out of Gael after he consumed the Dark Soul. The important thing about this is that it is also a pigment that lines back to the painter in Ashes of Ariandel. She tells you that she needs a special color to paint a new world. The painter needs a color that won't rot like old paintings. You can then return the pigment to the painter, and then she paints a new world. The place in which you fight Gael, the Pygmy's throne, is the biggest boss arena in all of Dark Souls because it is a fully explorable wasteland. It is a huge desert-like stretch made of ash which keeps going on and on. And that will be it. But relax, I'm not just gonna leave you alone. If you like this video, feel free to drop a like and also check out our other video on Dark Souls 2 bosses. Take care of yourselves and I will see you later.